Hello YouTube, this is Let's Talk Horror and welcome back to another video. Okay guys, so today I wanted to take a break from the Friday the 13th franchise. I've been talking a lot about that franchise for a couple of years. I'm going through movie by movie and reviewing them each, so if you want to check those out, those are up on my channel. But I'm about halfway through and I thought now would be a good time to take a little break, do a video on a different franchise, remind you all that this is not just a Friday the 13th channel, but a slasher channel, a horror channel. So that's what we're going to do today because we got some news about the Child's Play franchise. So let's dive into that. I want to give my thoughts, and I want to start by saying I have an interesting relationship with this franchise. The first franchise I ever got introduced to was Chucky and was Child's Play. That's the first franchise I got introduced to. I sat down, I watched from beginning to end. It wasn't Friday the 13th and Jason. It wasn't Halloween and Michael Myers. It was Chucky and Child's Play. And so I don't know if I would be sitting here talking to you today without getting into this franchise at like however young I was. I know I was relatively young when I got into it. I was a relatively young kid. So this franchise does mean a lot to me. I've been meaning to talk more about it on this channel. But I have overall some pretty mixed feelings about this franchise. Even for a long time as a kid, I remember I would have this weird protective attitude when it came to Child's Play. I would refuse for a long time to even explore other franchises because I thought, no, that would be a betrayal to Chucky, that would be a betrayal to this franchise, and this is my franchise, and this is the one I'm sticking with. Now, eventually that changed, of course, and I expanded my horror horizons. It's funny that I thought that way as a kid, but anyway, the other thing about it, and one of the reasons why I'm more of a casual Chucky fan these days, is simply put, as I expanded my horror horizons, I realized that I was more of a Jason fan, more of a Michael Myers fan, more of a Friday the 13th and Halloween fan. I kind of grew more attached to those franchises. Second of all, the other reason why I've become more of a casual Chucky fan is I have not enjoyed this franchise with any consistency for the last few decades, frankly. I have never cared for the horror comedy approach that Don Mancini has tried to take with this franchise for decades now. And I feel there's been a real identity crisis with this franchise that has caused me to become more of a casual fan of it. Still a fan of it, still one that I will always cherish and it will always mean a lot to me. And I certainly need to go through and review each of those movies, but one that I've kind of become a little bit more of a casual fan from where I was as a kid, which was very much a hardcore fan. But let's get into the news. Simply put, the news is Don Mancini is writing and directing a new Child's Play movie. It will be loosely tied to the television show. He is intending it to be in theaters, which is a big development. And he is going back to the tone and the vibe of the original classic era of Chucky, kind of like the Curse of Chucky installment. So my thoughts on that, first of all, whether it's going to be a theatrical release, that'll be interesting to see. I would certainly like that. I've always wanted to see a Mancini Chucky movie on the big screen. I've never had the opportunity, so I think that'd be cool. But more importantly, on going back to the tone of kind of the classic era of Chucky, as much as I want to be jumping for joy over that news, because that is more of the Chucky fan that I am, as I said earlier. I've never really been a huge fan of the horror comedy approach, the straight up horror comedy approach that Don Mancini has tried to take with this franchise. I did not care for Bride of Chucky. I hated Seed of Chucky, and then Cult of Chucky, and then the 2 out of the 3 seasons of the TV show that really tried to go, the horror comedy approach, I didn't care for. I am someone who very much likes my Chucky, certainly with a certain comedic charm, but I very much like that classic era of the Child's Play franchise, that it was trying to be a scarier, straight-up horror film with some comedic charm through Chucky's personality, not a full-blown, zany horror comedy. That's the type of Child's Play movie I really like, guys. I know some people really do like the straight-up horror comedy, straight-up zany era of Chucky, but I am much more as someone who likes my Chucky scarier. I like a Chucky movie that feels much more like a horror movie where the horror outweighs the comedy. Still has some of that comedic charm, but the horror outweighs the comedy. That's what I like, and that's what I think they captured so well in those early movies. As much as I want to be excited about this announcement that he's going back to that and going back to the tone of like The Curse of Chucky or Child's Play 2, which, by the way, is my favorite of the franchise. I think that a big reason for that is because I think that had the perfect tone. That had a lot of the comedic charm that I want in a Chucky movie, but it was a horror movie, and the horror outweighed the comedy, and they had just enough comedy in there driven through Chucky's personality that it was there and it was noticeable, but it was a horror movie. It was when Chucky was still scary. You know, he was still a scary, frightening character, and it wasn't a full-blown horror comedy. So Child's Play 2, you know, hearing him say he wants to go back to that and go back to like Curse of Chucky, that's really exciting. And I wish I could be full-blown excited for it. But Don Mancini has just done this so many times with this franchise where he'll say he's going to go back to that tone, and then he'll do it for one movie, or in the case of the TV show, one season of the TV show. And then after he does that, and for the most part, a lot of people who think like me are happy with what he has delivered. He shows he can still do that tone. Then he tries to go back to the wacky, zany horror comedy route. And I don't like that, and I don't know if I'll ever really warm up to that. I know that there are some people that are really into that version of Chucky and love the horror comedy approach, the ultra zany horror comedy approach. I don't, and I don't think it's been great for the franchise. And in many ways, while the franchise doesn't feel as stale as something like Friday the 13th and like Halloween has at points, because Don Mancini has always been willing to change it up, it's also really made it to where it feels like the franchise is going through an identity crisis in many ways. And it has been for decades now, because Don Mancini really wants to do this ultra wacky, ultra zany horror comedy approach, and then you have fans like me, and I would even say maybe the majority of the fan base, that wants, you know, a certain level of that, like a certain level of comedy in their Chucky movie, but they wanted the horror to outweigh the comedy. They don't want it to be a full-blown horror comedy. You know, I'm in that group, and so as much as I'd like to be excited about this announcement, and to a certain extent I am, he needs to do it for a couple of movies or a couple of projects in a row for me to be truly pumped and back on board, because he's done this to us before. He has promised us before, like, hey, we've heard you, we've listened to the fans, we're going back to the tone and the feel of the original movies, and then he does that for one, and then he pulls the rug out from under us and does this whole full-blown wacky, zany horror comedy routine. And I'm telling you, just again, a lot of us are not going to get on board with that. I know, I don't know if I can ever get on board with that, because that's just not my style of Chucky, but I am excited. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think I'm at a point where I have to see it for a couple of projects in a row, you know, a couple of movies in a row, whatever it is, of that consistent tone, of the tone that I want, before I get truly excited and back on board with this franchise. Because I want to fall in love with this franchise again, guys. It's a franchise, and it's a character that means so much to me. As I said before, I don't think I'm sitting here talking to you today, or at the very least, it's not a guarantee I'm sitting here talking to you today without the Child's Play franchise and without Chucky. But just the discombobulated feel of the franchise, the identity crisis the franchise has been going through for decades, has kind of, you know, made me fall out of love with it to a certain extent. And I want to be a hardcore fan again. I want to be fully back on board. I need to see it for more than one movie out of Don Mancini, because I don't know if I can ever be fully back on board with this wacky, zany version of Chucky that Don Mancini feels he has to force down our throats every couple of projects. You know, as I've said, I want a Chucky that is certainly has a comedic charm, but is more horror than comedy. And hopefully, finally, he's made the decision to deliver that for us and a lot of the fans that really prefer that version of Child's Play of Chucky. But that's going to do it for me today, guys. Comment below and let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with me? Or do you disagree with me? Are you someone that really loves the wacky, zany, horror comedy version of Chucky? Or are you like me and you want the more scarier, horror-driven version of Chucky? Comment below and let me know your thoughts, and I will see you guys later. Okay, take care.